Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Lung Map virtual meeting, Advocating, Accelerating, and Amplifying Lung Cancer Discovery. My name is Jennifer Newsom. I'm a Senior Project Manager at the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, and it is such a pleasure to have you here today. As many of you may know, LungMap has evolved significantly since its launch in 2014, adapting to advances in science, changes in clinical practice, and the real-world needs of patients. From expanding access to biomarker-driven therapies, bringing clinical trials earlier into care, and making participation more inclusive and practical, today's discussion is a part of that continued evolution. So today we have some really exciting topics to discuss. We will hear about new developments in the trial, our new active studies, hear from clinicians who work very closely with the trial, and most importantly, we will hear from our wonderful and inspiring patient advocates who will share their perspective about LungMap and other clinical trial-related topics, and so you're in for a great treat today. With that being said, we're going to kick off our program with a presentation by Dr. Karen Redkamp. Dr. Redkamp is the chair of the LungMap trial, and under her leadership, LungMap continues to expand and to have real impact. And it is truly a pleasure to have her here today. With that being said, I'll give the floor to Dr. Karen Redkamp.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for having me today. I'm pleased to discuss our LungMap platform protocol and provide some background for the group here to then expand into some of the discussions we'll be having later. So, as Jennifer mentioned, LungMap has been in existence for over a decade now, and it's really evolved over time to match the changes in lung cancer treatment. LungMap has always been for patients who have received prior therapy and initially opened prior to the use of immunotherapy in lung cancer. And that approval for immunotherapy, as you can see from our timeline, was right as LungMap was opening. And quickly the group shifted and allowed for prior immunotherapy in some patients. And as we started just in squamous cell, but then moving into 2019, LungMap then opened for all patients as we understood that the unmet need was still there for patients with non-squamous non-small cell lung cancer. And so throughout, we have continued to pivot, and most recently in 2024, we opened LungMap, what we are calling LungMap 3.0, an amendment that now allows patients to have their own platform. The previous platforms were always using Foundation Medicine, and as the testing platform for next generation sequencing, and the LungMap 3.0 now allows other testing platforms as long as they're CLIA certified and have sufficient genes on them, and even allows some patients for liquid biopsies and ctDNA testing. So this is really moving toward where practice is now in 2025. And this has been a successful public-private partnership. Really with help from Friends of Cancer Research, helping us here today, and FNIH. We really had collaborations, and these included governmental collaborations with FDA, NCI, and CTEP. And then what's really running the group are the NCTN groups, which provide the clinical trial infrastructure and the patients for the trials and the investigators for the trials. And this has a governance and makes this the success that it has been for over a decade. And again, we've had multiple industry partners throughout the years. And previously, we have worked with Foundation Medicine, and now just recently are opening up to multiple platforms for testing. We met a little over a year ago and decided that as we were maturing, we needed to really bring this to the next level and set up our mission and vision statements. And really, LungMap really is aiming to transform metastatic non-small cell lung cancer treatment through precision medicine, tailoring these therapies to each tumor's genetic makeup, with a mission to enhance patient outcomes by partnering with our key stakeholders to expedite innovative research and clinical application while leveraging patient data to inform future advances. And this is the one piece where, because this trial is mature and a decade old, we have a decade worth of tumor tissue and blood that we are now putting into manuscripts and research that will inform the future of LungMap and other lung cancer research. And again, in our vision, we envision a future where personalized care for metastatic non-small cell lung cancer will be rooted in precision medicine and the latest research that is accessible to all. Our goal is continually foster a collaborative environment that fosters breakthroughs, making lung cancer a manageable condition while eliminating disparities in care and treatment outcomes. And our objectives have really stayed relatively the same, and this is for the screening study. We want to determine the eligibility for participation in our biomarker-driven match studies and our non-match sub-studies. And this is using the LungMap umbrella protocol. We test participant specimens or have the collection of the results prior to matching them into the biomarker-driven or unmatched sub-studies. We are looking at screening rates and the percentage of patients assigned to sub-studies, and we have translational medicine objectives to look at the prevalence of biomarkers through previously completed tests or those who get tested within the LungMap platform. These are kind of busy slides, but this is showing how patients are screened and assigned into sub-studies. And again, they can submit their own tissue and can get pre-screened if they are submitting their own tissue. They can also get a new biopsy if needed, and that is covered. And this testing is still done as it was in the past through Foundation Medicine. For those who are screening at progression, we can still test if patients need it, but if they have their own tumor testing done, those can be submitted also through our alternative route. And patients get at least one sub-study, either biomarker identified, or they go to the unmatched sub-study. And if there is more than one biomarker, they can actually be randomized to another sub-study upon the time of tumor progression. And here is our current LungMap schema. We have studies that are for treatment-naive patients for MET, which are more rare alterations. And so we have MET amplification, and we really have the first study that's available with amivantamab subcutaneous, and that's for, again, MET amplified patients. We have MET exon 14 skipping, and this is newly allowed to be treatment naive or previously treated with tepotinib and ramucirumab. We'll be hearing a little bit more about that. And then we also have a group of tyrosine kinase inhibitor treated patients, which is a relatively new cohort that we have in LungMap. And this the first trial was S1900G. This is specific for patients with EGFR mutation who have progressed on prior osimertinib or EGFR TKI, who now have MET amplification at the time of resistance, and the combination is osimertinib plus capmatinib plus or minus ramucirumab. And a trial in development here is looking at relapsed advanced non-small cell lung cancer with actionable genomic alterations. So this would be any actionable genomic alteration. And this is looking at the TROP2 directed antibody in addition to PD-1 VEGF bispecific antibodies, agents that are very hot right now in lung cancer research. And then we have the non-matched sub-studies, and we have learned over time that having non-matched sub-studies are essential to enrolling patients, because if you don't meet these few match studies, you want your patient to be able to have a study. And so I'm happy to announce, and we'll hear more from Dr. Wakar, that S1800E is now open with docetaxel and ramucirumab with or without cemiplimab. And we're developing another S1800G with an anti-IL-27 and PD-1 inhibitor for our unmatched sub-study so that we don't have a break in that unmatched sub-study. Who are we now? And you see over time, the screening registrations over 5,000. Majority have been pre-screened, but I think as we are working on LungMap 3.0, we will see this number screened at progression will become higher. The sub-study assignments shown on the bottom, and those that are assigned to a total assigned to a sub-study after progression, even those who are assigned to sub-studies at additional sub-studies after progression were over 100 patients. And you see the numbers here. We are represented across the United States, and we'll be hearing from Dr. Fowler and in some of his experiences. But this is a huge benefit of LungMap is the access across the United States, including rural areas. So again, some of the benefits of LungMap are this partnership and this working within NCTN and our NCORP sites, which is over 800 sites nationally and roughly half are community-based sites. And this increases representation, which we'll show momentarily. Some reduction in complications of individual contracting because this is all going through NCTN and has built on this infrastructure, which is an opportunity for large and small companies alike. Again, more benefits of LungMap. This facilitates testing of novel agents or rare biomarkers because the testing is all done prior in the screening portion. We collect biospecimens and can explore those in translational medicine studies in the future. We offer access to leading lung cancer researchers to companies. We facilitate interactions with the FDA and CTEP and the NCI. And we have a very well-oiled machine and project management system that utilizes SWOG operations, SWOG Statistics and Data Management Center, and the FNIH to really have streamlined activation. And we'll show a little bit more. And the partnership with Friends of Cancer Research, engaging in advocacy, as we see here, helps to keep this running and keeps the LungMap at the forefront of people's minds, including our patients, which we couldn't do without. So accelerated timelines, this is just an example for pre-submission, 12 months, and then total accrual of time over a little less than 2 years. And so we have a 3-year phase 2 trial that had over 150 patients enrolled. And again, the impact, I think we've talked about a lot of the benefits, over 35 publications, over 10,000 annotated specimens, which I think is really a resource that we're starting to tap into in a more meaningful way. We have increased representativeness across patients in enrollment and higher numbers of patients over 65, increased numbers of ethnic minority patients, and really increasing patients from rural sites, from socioeconomically deprived neighborhoods, and patients who are using either Medicaid or have no insurance. And it all comes back to the patient, and that's why we're here today. And we appreciate our patient advocates and our panelists today. But our patients really is what drives this. This is a patient, Austin, who said, "I said absolutely. If I can go on trial and help someone else, I would gladly do it because they're fighting, excuse my language, a hell of a battle." So we appreciate everyone here, and thank you for running this webinar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Redcamp. Next, we will hear from Dr. Simon Wakar, co-chair of LungMap. Dr. Wakar has been a driving force of innovation for the trial, and we're so excited to hear from her today. I will now turn things over to her, and then you will hear from my colleague, Ms. Judy Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm very excited to speak with you all today regarding a sub-study of LungMap that we have just activated on April 28th. This is S1800E. It's a non-match sub-study. We know that there has been a lot of interest from patients in participating in LungMap, and some disappointment when there was not a non-match available for them to get onto if they didn't have a matching biomarker present. So here we have S1800E. This is a randomized phase 2/3 study. This is looking at comparing standard of care docetaxel and ramucirumab to the triplet combination of docetaxel, ramucirumab, and cemiplimab. Cemiplimab is an anti-PD-1 agent. This is approved as a single agent as well as in combination with chemotherapy in the first-line setting. But we're really investigating what is the benefit of continuing a PD-1 drug with second-line chemotherapy along with the VEGF inhibitor with ramucirumab. This study is specifically for patients who've received previous platinum-based chemotherapy as well as previous immunotherapy. And their tumors should have either had a stable disease, partial response, or complete response for 84 days or longer duration. So those patients where their tumors have secondary resistance, but not primary refractory disease. They have to have met the eligibility criteria to receive immunotherapy as well as chemotherapy and ramucirumab. As I mentioned, the randomization is 1:1 to either arm A standard of care, arm B cemiplimab with the triplet docetaxel ramucirumab. Because the safety of this combination is not well known, there will be a 10-participant safety run-in for the arm B. The primary objective for the study is to look at overall survival. Secondary objectives include progression-free survival, response rate, disease control rate, duration of response, toxicities, and then PFS and OS by stratification factors and PD-L1 status. We're also looking at some translational medicine objectives in this study and are collecting blood samples for circulating tumor DNA at baseline, as well as at the time of cycle 3, day 1, and at the time of disease progression, which will help us figure out patients who actually have their tumors responding to treatment, what are the biomarkers for that response, and in those patients, unfortunately, where we don't see the responses we would like, what are the mechanisms of resistance? So hoping really to not just help our patients with this treatment option, but also helping to advance science and eventually develop better novel treatments for our patients. So as I mentioned, the study is open. It's been open for about 2.5, 3 weeks, and we hope that there's a lot of excitement about this, and it can be open at all the different sites. If there are any questions pertaining to the study, please feel free to reach out to us, and we would be happy to assist with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wakar. Such exciting news about our new non-match sub-study. Appreciate you telling us about that. So I'd like to move on now to lung map perspectives from the oncologist's point of view. So first, I would like to introduce Dr. Paul Paik at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City. He's the PI for the lung map study S1900K, which focuses on MET exon 14 skipping gene changes. Thank you, Dr. Paik.
Thanks, Judy, for the introduction. I want to spend a little bit of time just to provide updates on S1900K, which, as Judy had mentioned, is a phase 2 study taking a look at this MET exon 14 skipping positive population, treating folks with either tepotinib, with or without ramucirumab. A lot of jargon there, but I'll get into what that exactly means in a little bit. But I think to try to make this as edifying and encouraging for the audience, I wanted to start with something a little bit high level, but also particularly relevant for the updates to this sub-study in particular, which is that, overall, when we think about clinical trials and protocols, I think the most ideal sense, trials should be dynamic. They really shouldn't be set in stone. And the reason why I say this is because even though we try with all wisdom and knowledge to try to make the protocol really good at the start, we really need to see how it plays out in practice. And that importantly means taking a look at the participant experience, not just from a side effect standpoint, as we often do, but from a logistical standpoint, just that overall experience to tell us whether or not something is awry with the protocol in ways that we hadn't anticipated. This also necessarily means talking to the local treating teams, not just the doctors, but the clinical trial nurses, nurse practitioners, administrative staff, for other insights as to how the protocol is going. And then as part of the study team, the chair, co-chair, statisticians, and lung map leadership, we take a look at all of that. We take a look at how accrual is doing, and we come up with potential proposed changes to the protocol to ultimately make it better. And that's exactly what this update is for S1900K. When we started this, it really began in the winter of 2023 with a lot of optimism. But we began hearing from participants things like, I was just diagnosed with having this MET exon 14 skipping alteration, but I don't have access to this study because it's only open after I receive immunotherapy or chemotherapy in the frontline setting. We heard something very similar from the local treating teams at different sites, particularly in the community. But we also heard from them questions like, what is a lymphoscintigraphy scan? And you know something's wrong when someone asks in the medical field, what is this scan supposed to be? And so we took a look at a lot of this feedback. We took a look at how the study was accruing. And we, of course, figured out that the rational approach was to try to get rid of these barriers. And so in a series of amendments that went into play at the end of last year and then recently in March, we eliminated the mandatory nature of the lymphoscintigraphy scan, so these became optional. And we importantly removed the line of therapy restriction in the protocol to allow pretty much anyone to get on at whatever point that they're diagnosed when the treatment's going to be necessary, including in the frontline setting right after the immediate diagnosis. And I'll get into a little bit at the end of this presentation, some of the early positive changes and signals that we've seen because of that. But just in terms of summary for the protocol itself, MET exon 14 skipping alterations are relatively new. It's one of the newest actionable oncogenic alterations we have identified in lung cancers. They happen about 3 to 4% of patients. The mechanism is pretty interesting. Don't have a lot of time to get into it, but the cartoon summarizes it pretty well. Basically, it deletes out this regulatory domain in the protein, which makes the protein basically always on in a way that we can target with inhibition against MET. We've known since around 2019 and 2020 that targeting this works with MET inhibitors. There were a couple of drugs that were FDA approved after 2020, one of them capmatinib, the other tepotinib. They work about the same. Response rate's about 50% with a median PFS of 12 months and an overall survival of 20 months in a firmly elderly population. And I don't have time to go into details, but those data are pretty good. But they are not the best that we've seen. We need only look at other targets and drugs like osimertinib in EGFR-positive lung cancer or alectinib and lorlatinib in ALK-positive lung cancer. If you charted response rate and duration of response in these axes to see that in purple, tepotinib is pretty good, for example, but it's not the best. And the question then becomes, well, how do we get it up there to the upper right-hand corner with the rest of its cousins? And we've taken a look at this in the usual ways that we do, probing genetics of tumors at the time of resistance, but really haven't come up with a great answer. So the standard way of trying to assess for this that has been so successful in other contexts just had not worked. One of the very interesting things that we began to see, and we saw, but of course the patients themselves experienced in spades, was an unusual fingerprint for side effects with MET inhibition, marked by kind of leaky vasculature, very high rates of peripheral edema, approaching 60%. So most patients developing peripheral edema that could be quite substantial. And in association with that, benign pleural effusions, some leakiness at the level of the kidney causing leakage of albumins, very unusual side effects that were causing a lot of quality of life issues for those patients who were on a drug. And one of the other things that we noticed is that the timing of this side effect was unusual. It was not an immediate side effect. It took a couple months to develop, and it just didn't go away. Even with dose reductions. Really, the only way to make it go away is to stop the drug. And I think that told some of us that something unusual was happening and something quite important biologically. Maybe this was then a window into potential resistance that we could target in terms of drugs like tepotinib and capmatinib in this context. And so without going into too much detail, there's a body of literature that's already been published that suggests that this is in fact the case, that the act of giving someone a MET inhibitor actually it induces a secondary pathway activation in this thing called VEGF and VEGFR2, which we've known about in cancer for quite some time. But this causes two things. One is that we think it can cause resistance to MET inhibition, and the other is that we have a lot of data that suggests that this really does cause leakiness. And so if this pathway is being upregulated by giving folks tepotinib or capmatinib, then maybe this is something we can target by blocking VEGF or VEGFR2. And that really is at the heart of this study, that by blocking VEGFR2 signaling, using ramucirumab, we can try to achieve two things at once. First is to try to make the drugs work better and work longer, but second, and quite importantly, to try to decrease this side effect burden that we see with edema in our participants who are treated. So again, trying to really kill two birds with one stone in this study. In terms of the schema, really the one thing I want to highlight is the amendment that went through in March, which is now pretty much you can get on whenever you're diagnosed, including at the time of diagnosis, as a first-line treatment. And we've tried to make it as porous as possible, as with all other lung map studies from an eligibility standpoint. Folks are randomized to getting either tepotinib or tepotinib plus this ramucirumab medication every 3 weeks. And we're looking at efficacy as the primary endpoint, response rate. But importantly, we are taking a very good look at side effects also, particularly the development of peripheral edema, hypothesizing that this should go down quite a bit in combination versus just tepotinib by itself. And some, the one piece of information that I have, the slide is not shown here, is that we do have an update in accrual. As of May 5th, 2025, we have had an additional 5 patients go on study after that amendment in March. Opening it up to first-line folks went into play. And that 5 patients is pretty good. That really exceeds the accrual that we saw for the entire 365 days before that. So I think that's pretty good early evidence that by listening, importantly, again, to the subsites, by listening to the patients themselves, we can make changes that really do impact the ability to do these studies, get access to these new medications to folks. And so that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pig. Let me now introduce Dr. Brian Fowler. Dr. Fowler is a medical oncologist at Missouri Baptist Medical Center in St. Louis, and he's focusing on the community and has been one of LungMap's top accruers. And we really appreciate that, Dr. Fowler. So thank you so much, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Judy. So I'm a principal investigator of Heartland Cancer Research, which is a network of community sites providing clinical trials for cancer patients in central and southern Illinois and eastern Missouri. In order to present the opportunities of LungMap, I wanted to present a story of someone who's likely logged into this and watching this right now. It's a patient who I see at one of my outreach sites about an hour and a half south of St. Louis, which is really the nearest place for an academic center to get access to clinical trials. I don't have time to go too far into this case, but she basically had advanced lung cancer that became resistant to the standard frontline therapy of immunotherapy plus chemotherapy shortly after starting it. At that point, she had limited treatment options, mainly additional chemotherapy, which is associated with a survival of about 25% at 1 year and much less than that at 2 years. She went on a LungMap sub-study called S1800D, where she received 2 immunotherapy drugs, no chemotherapy. One of the immunotherapy drugs she was already getting previously and had progressed on it. And I won't go too much into this because I don't have time, but you'll see in May of 2022, from May to August, which was before she went on the study, she had tumors, which I highlighted or circled, that were growing and subsequently essentially went away. And once she started this therapy, and she started this in shortly after August of 2022, her most recent scan in March. So she's currently in remission 2.5 years into the study. Like I said, this is chemotherapy-free regimen. And in terms of side effects, they've actually been very mild, much less than what she was getting before she went on the study. Mainly a rash on the hands. This is called eczema. She has an injection site reaction that lasts a few days after each injection. But she's overall tolerated this extremely well, and the side effects have been very manageable. It's a patient that lives about, like I said, an hour and a half south of St. Louis. She has difficulty with transportation. She doesn't have a computer to be watching this right now. I think she might be watching it on her phone. So it's not easy for her to get to an academic center to get on a trial like this. The LungMap study makes it possible for us to offer these studies at small rural sites like this. And this study immensely benefited her. But I think her participation in the study also immensely benefits all of us because we get a better understanding of how well these treatments work, and we're working to figure out what about her cancer made it so uniquely responsive to this treatment. The other benefit to providing clinical trials in the community like LungMap is that's where most of the cancer care is actually delivered in this country. It gives you access to a larger, more diverse patient population like this one that I presented. And it also allows you to test these new treatments in a real-world healthcare setting, not just in large hospitals with all kinds of specialists and providers around, but small outreach clinics to see if they work just as well there. It also accelerates uptake of new interventions by providers who are getting the taste of them on these clinical trials. And there's evidence that when patients participate in clinical trials, particularly at rural sites, they have better outcomes compared to patients who don't participate in studies. I'll gloss over this briefly for time, but speaking to a bunch of patient advocates about reducing the burden of lung cancer, at least that associated with smoking, I will mention that part of our success that you heard about earlier is not just what we're doing, but it's where we are, which is Missouri, which has the second lowest cigarette price for cigarettes in the country because it has the lowest cigarette tax of any state. It also has a high rate of smoking. Illinois, which is neighboring, has a much higher tax and lower smoking rates. So one thing patient advocates to do to at least help with the burden of smoking-related lung cancer is advocate for more expensive cigarettes. So to go over the opportunities, and some of these Dr. Reckamp and Dr. Paik have already alluded to, but the low staffing and regulatory burdens allows us to do this at a site with maybe one research staff rather than at a large academic center with many, dozens of research staff and lots of resources. It gives us access to a large menu of rationally designed clinical trials. It allows us to do it at small rural sites. Some pharmaceutical studies won't allow us to do them at rural sites because they don't want to go out and audit those sites. And as Dr. Paik alluded, it allows us to interact with the study teams, provide feedbacks to allow things to work better in the community, which doesn't always happen with pharmaceutical studies. The LungMap 3.0 expansion that was mentioned will help with allowing more tissue testing from different vendors for eligibility. But the provided foundation medicine testing does help for the patients who wouldn't ordinarily have access to it, so they can get it done for free as part of the study. Challenges, I can't think of too many since I'm biased. That's why I was picked to talk today, so I'm a big fan. But there could always be more trials. And then tissue is really still an issue. There is still confusion about for what study requires what type of tissue, whether patients need a new biopsy. Sometimes we can't get enough tissue because there just isn't a big tumor to go after. Some of these studies have stricter eligibility criteria compared to other pharma studies that we might do. And financial compensation is usually less compared to pharmaceutical studies, although the pharmaceutical studies usually come with a lot more work to go along with that. And the other thing I'll mention is that the LungMap study S1800A is led to a follow-up study called Pragmatica, which we'll hear about in a few weeks, the results, but they may change practice to a chemotherapy-free regimen that might affect accrual to Dr. Wakar's study, but I think that could be easily fixed with an amendment if that happens. That's all I could think of. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Paul, and thank you all the physicians for those exciting updates. LungMap has always stood out for its ability to evolve, not just with the science, but with what patients truly need. Today's discussion is about taking that evolution beyond just LungMap by centering patient voices of advocacy leaders who work directly with patients and families every day. Their insights are essential to ensuring that clinical research keeps pace with the realities of care, access, and equity. We'll explore in this panel how we can better support early trial access, improve biomarker testing, and continue to remove barriers that keep too many patients from the innovation they deserve. I'm honored to be joined by three exceptional leaders in the lung cancer advocacy community, and I look forward to a conversation rooted in practical ideas and forward momentum. So let's get started. I'm joined by Andrea Ferris, President and CEO of Longevity, Marcia Horn, President and CEO of the International Cancer Advocacy Network and an advocate with the Met Crusaders, and Kim Norris, President of the Lung Cancer Foundation of America. So as a bridge from all of that exciting news about LungMap, Marcia, I'm going to start with you. As a patient advocate and research advocate, where does LungMap fit into the work you do at ICANN and at the Met Crusaders?
Well, first of all, Ryan, thank you so much for this invitation. And it's great to be here, and especially your leadership at Friends of Cancer Research from the very beginning. The 3 MET studies that were beautifully articulated by Dr. Reckamp and the tepotinib plus or minus ramucirumab trial, brilliantly explained by Dr. Paik, are 3 crucially important arms of LungMap for the Met Crusaders. So we've got to find these patients and get patients and their families putting LungMap in each of these 3 cohorts as appropriate onto their talking points for medical oncology appointments. Nothing could be more important than finding newly diagnosed patients. As Dr. Paik had explained, we now have tepotinib plus or minus ramucirumab in the front line. So LungMap and the 3 MET arms essentially combine the best of all worlds from a patient and from a patient advocate standpoint. As Judy Johnson, my colleague at SWOG, knows, these protocols are analyzed by patients and patient advocates from the get-go, and that's so important. You've seen with all of our experts today, world-class investigators are involved, and the screening protocol for the 3 MET studies is available in 928 sites across the country. So in a sense, it's the essence of decentralization of trials. And as Dr. Reckamp mentioned earlier, access is so important to our patient community. So we want this to be high on the list, whether you're one of our EGFR resistor friends who are MET amplified by resistance mechanism, or MET exon 14 skipping, or MET amplified where you can potentially get the transformative benefit of subcutaneous amivantamab.
Thanks, Marcia. In flipping to the idea of integrating clinical trials more into standard treatment pathways, Andrea, I want to come to you. Clinical trials are often thought of as a last resort, yet many patients might benefit from enrolling as part of their first-line treatment. We see this a lot in pediatrics. What needs to change in the system or in the mindset to help clinical trials become a standard option earlier in care?
Thanks, Ryan. I think that clinical trials as a treatment of last resort is something that people who've been in the field for a while think of it that way, right? Because that's generally how it had happened. But over the last 10, 15 years, there have been so many advancements and additional clinical trials in lung cancer specifically, and first-line treatments in clinical trials. So really, clinical trials are part of clinical care now in lung cancer and often represent the best option for people. When they are newly diagnosed or at progression or so forth. So I think it is a mindset shift, but I think that it's happening in lung cancer. We happen to be a little bit at the forefront of it with precision medicine and other aspects, but other diseases will follow in this path too. So I think starting in medical school, we need to start teaching that clinical trials really can be part of clinical care and often the best treatment path. And for those clinicians, particularly in the community setting where they may have been out of med school and practicing for a long time and not necessarily specialists, they might be general oncologists and not keeping up with things. I think there is a strong education component to it. I think in the patient communities, and I'd love to hear from Kim and Marcia as well, but at least what we're seeing, and keep in mind, people who come to an advocacy group are the more activated or engaged patients to start with, right? So it's a biased sample set there. But they are also the ambassadors, and they are the people that others look to when they're looking for advice. And I think that within that community, at least the lung cancer community, they don't think of clinical trials as a treatment of last resort. They really think of it as part of their ongoing care and to see what's out there. So I think that education, mindset shift, and particularly starting with the youngins in the medical field as well to get them to embrace it. Similar to comprehensive biomarker testing up front, I think the newer clinicians think of it very differently than people who went to med school 20, 30 years ago before molecular medicine really took off.
I like that. Earlier education of the new physicians and re-education of physicians that have been around for a while.
I think so.
Yeah, no, that's great. Kim, I'm going to bring you in here, but did you want to comment on that subject before we pivot?
Well, I think Andrea said it well, but I think in the lung cancer world, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, clinical trials have been more the gold standard
Yeah.
of treatment. And with the rapid pace of discovery and the translational nature of the discoveries, you often get the best treatment possible on the clinical trials. And I think getting that message out continues to be extremely important.
And to Ryan, to that point too, we were talking about this earlier today on a different call, but again, in the lung cancer space, patients, they're often like trying to get into phase 1 trials. They're not waiting for phase 3 anymore. Phase 1 often is their best hope, so I think that in and of itself is indicative of the attitude within the patient communities towards trials.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Kim, pivoting a little bit to ensuring, and when we first launched LungMap, access to the Foundation Medicine platform was vital and kind of our key selling point. So as we talk about ensuring equitable access to comprehensive biomarker testing, we know that the biomarker testing can completely change the treatment path for someone with lung cancer. Yet many patients still aren't tested at diagnosis. So what are the key barriers still standing in the way, and what can be done to make testing more universal and equitable across all care settings?
I think there's two paths and areas of discussion for this. One is education and the other is policy. Just briefly on the policy side, many of the advocacy organizations are starting to push for individual states to mandate biomarker testing and to be covered through insurance. I think that kind of work is something that can happen very tangibly. I mean, states like I was looked up just before we came on board, Louisiana has required it now, Illinois. So I think the more we can get the individual states to mandate the importance of this and make sure that it's covered through insurance is critical. In terms of the education component, I think education is needed both still in the rural community provider situation and also the patients. I'm thrilled with LungMap that 50% is of the sites, accruing sites, are in rural communities. I mean, that's critical. And I think the more we can push that out, the more it helps educate the providers with the importance of getting biomarker testing. And you're right. Unfortunately, I still hear stories where patients are diagnosed and, they may have sent their tissue out for biomarker testing, but let's go ahead and start the chemo right away anyway. That kind of ruins part of the point. One of the things I like to say also is patients need patience. So you've been newly diagnosed, you want that out. You want to do something right away, and getting, say, chemo right off the bat before you've gotten the result of the biomarker testing feels like you're doing something and you're taking control. So I think patients need patience to ensure they get the proper and the right treatment. The other part of education is educating the public. And we need to go out into the communities in order to do that. And I think it's starting to happen. Anywhere from the mobile CT scan programs that are going on. I know one is at Cedars in Los Angeles. I know one's at the Ohio State. And that more and more of those are happening. And I think that's critical. The other thing is there's programs now being developed, and this is not new, but going out to barbershops, beauty salons, nail salons, faith-based areas, and communicating and educating the patients on the need for not only early scanning, but also for biomarker testing and the critical need for that. I know we've put together a program called Saving Lives Behind the Chair, and we're working with Black-owned beauty salon operators in the Atlanta area right now, getting the hairstylists to be educated on the importance of clinical trials, screening, and biomarker testing. They don't need to be experts on it, but that relationship that's built with their patients and with their clients, and the client comes in and says, "Oh, Uncle Joe keeps coughing. I'm worried about him." To be able to give them something tangible to do about it. But we need to get out into the communities to educate the patients and the public.
I like that message. So a lot of community involvement, both from the education, but I also like you brought up the state policy advocacy component, because oftentimes these conversations focus on national policy and national decision makers. But actions like what you covered in Louisiana are really important, and things that are tangible. Even when we have a federal Congress that might not be functional currently, we might have state governments that can take actions that really impact those patients.
Mm-hmm.
Marcia, I wanted to go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to echo Kim and say ACS CAN of American Cancer Society, and especially Pam Traxel, our fearless leader at ACS CAN. They're off and running and probably at 22 states now for the biomarker testing bill, and we're moving toward all 50 states thanks to ACS's leadership.
That's great. Marcia, just real quick follow-up on there. You're the new chairperson of the Biomarker Collaborative, and that involves all the lung cancer biomarkers and patient support groups. What's your mission there? What are you doing there that can kind of tie into this conversation we're having today?
Thanks, Ryan. Each of the member groups of the Biomarker Collaborative wants one thing overall, and that is to be introduced to the patient on diagnosis, or really at any point in the journey, but get that patient and his or her family introduced to the specific biomarker support group. And whether it's an actionable mutation, and we have obviously the MET Crusaders, we have EGFR exon 20, we have our friends at the EGFR resistors, whether it's a fusion, ALK positive, we have 3 RET positive groups, we have N-trackers and NRG1 energizers, which we just announced at ICANN. And so whether amplification, mutation, or fusion, or overexpression, every patient with non-small cell lung cancer needs to be introduced to their specific biomarker support group, really preferably at the testing report stage. And that way we can capture treatment naive patients. Why? Because the biomarker advocacy groups, we understand the treatment naive phase 2s. We understand the treatment naive phase 3s. And so that newly diagnosed patient could potentially have a transformative trial from the get-go that might be the standard therapy tomorrow approved by the FDA. So we really want to see the stratification of non-small cell lung cancer patients based on NGS or RNA sequencing, DNA, RNA, the works, and IHCs, immunohistochemistry, looking for that all-important MET overexpression or any overexpression.
Thanks. Andrea, a question that was sent to me prior to this was building on that a little bit. But when you're dealing with a lung cancer patient, they're hearing about biomarker testing and everything. But when you're dealing with a patient and they come to you or one of your colleagues with no actionable mutation, what do you as an advocate suggest for them?
So if they don't have a targetable, like an actionable target?
Yeah, so the question came from that a lot of people are hearing about these biomarker testing more, but then when it comes back and they don't have an actionable mutation.
There's actually a lot, so we just had our survivorship conference, and there were quite a few, we had 400 lung cancer survivors, of which a lot of them did have no actionable mutation. And for a long time, especially when targeted therapy first got it started, that's all we heard about. They kind of felt like the redheaded stepchild in a way. if you will. But there's actually a lot going on even for the no actionable mutations. Like all of the immunotherapy trials, you can't have a targetable mutation for a lot of them in order to go on to those also. So even in that scenario, we do encourage people to still talk to their doctors about clinical trials, and that there are clinical trials as a viable treatment option for that too. And I think the biomarker testing is hugely important, and it's not just to be tested, but to, as was alluded to before, to make treatment decisions based on a fully informed outcome of all of the testing. And that could tell you also what not to do, and what's not good for you. And oftentimes people, either with a targeted mutation or those without, it's very informative. So I think either way, the biomarker testing is hugely important. And I think our messaging has to be aligned with that. That it's not just to get to a support group, that's specific to you or other things, but it's that you and your physician or your doctor or your health team can make the right decision based on full information for you. So I think that we all just need to be somewhat careful in the language that we use when talking about this, and not just focusing on targeted therapies and other things, because that doesn't cover the entire lung cancer community.
Yeah, I think you're right. We're hearing that a lot. Like people are feeling almost like left out when they don't, but it's important to show that all this progress is being made for people without those mutations.
Exactly. And I think it's the diseases moving forward, holistically as well. And on the policy side, Personalized Medicine Coalition, we've been talking about it at our multi-stakeholder meetings as well. One of the pieces of the conversation is, rather than, because we're also working on reflexive testing for biomarker testing as well to be done, and what does that look like down the stream? But do we change how lung cancer is classified in the diagnostic code? So it's no longer lung cancer, but it's ALK-positive lung cancer is the diagnostic code that goes to it, because then by virtue of that, you can't make a diagnosis without the testing.
What
So there are a
actions
lot of different venues that are being pursued right now.
and what actions are being taken to help support that change? What can others do to help support your work in that?
Right now, we're still looking into it, so stay tuned. That's a TBD. Maybe it was a little premature for me to talk about it, but it definitely is an interesting venue to go down, and it's been done in other diseases also. So this is not unique.
Yeah, no, that's great, and thanks for that preview then. Kim, did you want to build on that at all? The issue of any patients you're interacting with?
Well, I think Andrea's point about the biomarker testing being, it's just as important to know what will work as what won't work. And
Yeah.
I think that's critical. And even in immunotherapy, identifying what targets cause it to work and not work. So it's not just the biomarkers per se that we think about in terms of targeted therapy, but it's critical. You need the whole picture. You need to know what's unique about your tumor and what is driving your cancer in order to get the best treatment, whatever that may be. And there's so many options, so many trials, so many people looking into this, that the more information you can have, the better the outcome and the treatment can be.
We heard Dr. Fowler talk about some of the benefits of the lung map in the community because of some of the burdens of some of the pharmaceutical trials. Either the companies don't want to open them and inspect the sites, or that the administrative burden of some of these are still very large. So I know this has been talked about constantly for a decade, 2 decades, but Marcia and Kim, we've made progress in designing more inclusive and flexible trials, but many patients still can't participate due to geography, as we heard, time, and definitely cost of transportation and all of those things. What are practical steps the system can take now to break down these barriers and expand access to patients? Marcia, maybe we'll start with you.
We'd love to see more decentralized trials. We'd love to see more just-in-time trials in partnership between pharma, biotech, and molecular testing labs. But what we really need to see in the siting of those just-in-time trials is a sense of urgency on the part of the teams that are coming up with the so-called convenient site. That convenient site for the patient and family can't be a 2.5-hour drive from, Palo Alto into Napa or so. And so we really need a sense of urgency and a sense of understanding that just in time and decentralization really needs to be convenient for patient and family.
Kim?
I think another really important part is the financial aspect, the financial burden to get to these sites. And even though LungMap 50% is out in the community, even in the community site, it can be difficult to get to where they need to go. We're talking days off of work, childcare, transportation, all of that. And I think we really need to, we keep talking about it and nothing's really happened yet much. And that is giving some kind of reimbursement to the patient to make it possible and feasible to get the treatment and the testing they need.
Yeah, Ryan, to that end, we're part of a coalition. It's called Equitable Access to Clinical Trials. And the website is eactproject.org. And the whole goal of it is financial neutrality, to make a person financially indifferent between going onto a trial versus standard of care. And it's really non-medical costs. So it doesn't deal with medical costs in the trial right now, but parking, transportation, other things like that. And it gives tips to the sites as well as to the sponsors of how they could reimburse for different things or not, because oftentimes they think that you can't do it, and there are tax implications as well and Medicaid implications. But there's a lot of very rich information on that website with respect to creating this financial neutrality.
I like that term, financial neutrality during that decision-making process. So that
Yeah.
isn't part of it. I really like that. We only have a few minutes left. I wanted to ask each of you just briefly a last question, talking about along the lines of fostering collaborative advocacy. So each of your, Marsha, I'll start with you, then to the closing word. Each of your orgs has helped move the field forward in significant ways, from policy to patient support. What's one thing advocacy groups and research leaders or research leaders could be doing better together to drive faster progress in lung cancer treatment and trial access?
Wow.
Continue multi-stakeholder collaborations, and LungMap really is all that. It's that public-private partnerships thought. It's the collaboration with top investigators, both in academic medicine and in the community. And it's a real partnership with patients, families, caregivers, advocates, and the entire research continuum. So if we can continue these collaborations, especially in times of uncertainty and budgetary stress, I think we'll be really well off.
Kim?
I think one of the most unique and greatest actions that have happened in the last 10 or 15 years is the creation of the oncogene groups, which was totally patient-driven. And I think it's changed the whole environment of the .orgs and the advocacy groups. And it causes us even more. I think we do a pretty good job of collaboration personally. I mean, we all know each other. I always say the good news, bad news is, the bad news is there aren't many of us, especially in relation to the impact of the disease itself. The good news is there's not many of us, so we all know each other and we know what we're doing. We respect what we all do, and it's like a big pie. But we just, all of us together still just have a small piece of the pie working together. But the oncogene groups bring a whole unique structure to it. And I think it's been very helpful and a great model of what you can do with advocacy and collaboration.
Andrea?
Mine's a yes. So absolutely, I echo Marsha and Kim. I don't need to repeat that because they both said it so eloquently. But I think the other piece too that we can't lose sight of, particularly in today's environment, is that we have got to invest in research and protect the younger generation of researchers, because they are the future. And whatever we can do collectively together to ensure that that pipeline is sound and secure and safe. And, it's the future workforce for industry partners. It's the future workforce for academic centers, and certainly is the future hope of our patient communities. So I would say, particularly in this environment, that collectively, that's probably the most important thing that we can do.
I like that. Very important. So, what we heard today is work together, get in the community, educate patients and non-patients alike, and push for policies on the national, but especially the state level, and do all we can to support patients with knowledge, financial assistance. And their bottom line, there's exciting science and new treatments at all stages of development that should be considered as patients consider their treatment options. I want to thank the excellent panel and thank the 3 leaders with me today. They've done truly exceptional things in the community. And now I will turn it over to my colleague from SWOG, Frank DeSanto. Frank?
Thanks, Ryan. We have just a minute, so I'll add to your thanks by thanking the more than 5,000 volunteers with lung cancer who participated in LungMap over the years and done so much to advance treatment of the disease. We will post a recording of this webinar. If you registered, you'll get an email with the link. We'll also post the link to social media, to lungmap.org, and to the Friends and SWOG websites. And finally, if you have questions you didn't get to ask, you can email us at lungmapaec@swog.org, lungmapaec@swog.org. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day.